Hey, welcome back to the second part of the executive branch. The second most important person in the executive branch is going to end up being the vice president. The vice president is spelled out a little bit in the Constitution, but he was never really expanded upon. So let's talk about the vice president. Who's our current one? Joe Biden, this dude. 45 men have served as vice president. 9 of them, or 1 out of 5, become president by secession. What secession means, this is important because it'll be a quiz question. Secession means that the president died in office and then the vice president took over. So the vice president became president because the president died. So only 9 people in our 250 plus year history have become president that way. 14 vice presidents later went on to be elected president themselves. The most recent was George Bush Sr. Al Gore ended up running for president, but he wasn't elected. Now, there are 3 qualifications to become vice president. You could probably guess they are the exact same as because the qualifications to become president. You got to be a natural born citizen of the United States. You need to live in the U.S. for 14 years, and you need to be 35 years old. The vice president's salary is the same as the Chief Justice of the United States and the Speaker of the House. So it's the same salary as the Speaker of the House and the Chief Justice because the Vice President is considered to have equal power to those people. Just like the Speaker of the House is in charge of the House, the Vice President is actually the President of the Senate. So he's in charge of the entire Senate. His salary is $227,000 and $300. Vice presidents that succeeded the presidency. So these are vice presidents who, because the president passed away in office, became president. So, president that died, William Henry Harrison. He died of pneumonia 6 months into his presidency. His vice president, John Taylor, became president. Zachary Taylor had a stomach infection. Some people believe he was assassinated, was poisoned, but Zachary Taylor died in office, and Millard Fillmore became president. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Andrew Johnson took over. Garfield was assassinated. Chester Arthur took over. William McKinley was assassinated. Theodore Roosevelt took over. Harding passed away in office. Calvin Coolidge took over. FDR had a brain hemorrhage. Harry Truman took over. JFK got assassinated. Lyndon B. Johnson took over. Richard Nixon ended up resigning, and Gerald Ford took over. Which Gerald Ford was actually only vice president for a couple of months because the vice president, Agnew, actually resigned right before that. This is just an interesting fact. Beginning in 1841, there have been a 20-year cycle of presidential deaths from 1840 to 1960, with every president elected in the year ending in a 0 had died in office. Reagan apparently broke the cycle when he survived a near-fatal assassination attempt in 1981. So what if the president dies? We need to ensure that the government continues to function. We can't have just the government shut down. So we have like certain rules that govern secession. In order to keep the person, these rules give you an order that people become president in, if that makes sense. So if If the president dies, the vice president becomes president by secession. Now, in 1967, the practice of secession was added to the Constitution with the adoption of the 25th Amendment. So, if the president and the vice president are in Air Force One and it crashes into a mountain and they both die, the person who becomes president after the vice president is the Speaker of the House. So if the president and the vice president die, then the Speaker of the House becomes president. Then the president pro tempore, then the Secretary of State, then the Secretary of Treasury, then the Secretary of Defense. So if all these people die, okay, so if the president, the Speaker of the House, the president pro tempore, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Treasury all die, then the Secretary of Defense becomes President of the United States. You know, if you have all these people die all the way through, you know, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, then the Secretary of Transportation becomes president. So no matter how many, what horrible catastrophe happens, there will always be somebody next in line to become president. So what does the vice president actually do? It's actually a pretty sweet gig because they really don't do much. The vice president has two major official jobs in the government. One, presides over the Senate. Okay, so he's the president. He's like the Speaker of the House in the Senate. He's like the head honcho of the Senate. Two, he determines if the president is disabled or can't perform his job. One really nice benefit of being vice president is that under no circumstances can you be fired. You can be stepped down if you like. All other presidential appointees can be fired, but the vice president can't. And so, we've had vice presidents step down for political reasons before. The last being Agnew stepped down and Ford took over his position. Now, those are the official rules of the vice president. The real reason people become vice president is to help the president get elected. So they balance the ticket. What does that mean? Presidents choose a vice president as a running mate to strengthen their chances to be elected. And so they base this, if you're elected president, or if you're running for president, you want somebody really popular standing right next to you to get you as many votes as possible. And so that's why people pick the vice president. You're going to pick somebody that people will vote for you because of. Now, here's where things get complicated. The U.S. Constitution says anybody can run for president. So it doesn't give you a process about how to nominate people to become president. They just tell you the qualifications. So there are only a couple, few state and federal laws that regulate presidential nominations. So whose responsibility is it then to nominate somebody to run for president? It becomes the major political parties. So the Republicans come up, they all get together, and they figure out who they want to run for president. The Democrats get together and figure out who they want to run for president. So there are really two campaigns for presidency. The first one is the presidential primaries. This is a contest within a political party. Okay, so you have like the Republican primaries. This is everybody inside the Republican Party who wants to be president runs against each other to see who has the best chance of becoming president. So, and this just goes by a popular vote in which members of both political parties decide their number one person. So everybody gets together, they vote on one Republican candidate, like all the Republican candidates, out of all the Republican candidates, all the Republicans in the country vote for one of them. They say, hey, this is our guy, he's got the best chance of winning because most of the Republican Party's behind him. After somebody has been nominated for presidential candidacy, they then run against the person of the opposite party to become president. So then you have general elections. This is like a competition between the Republicans and the Democrats to become president of the United States. So whoever wins that becomes president. Now the primaries, you get all the Democrats and all the Republicans together and they vote for their favorite candidate. And then that person runs for president. And the general election, it doesn't work that way. We have a popular election in the United States, but we also have electorates. So, presidential primaries, we have 42 states that have some sort of primary, and then a couple states that have caucuses. Caucuses is where voters meet at like their local districts and they vote directly for their nominee. After a nominee has been selected by the party, you have a convention. You have either a the Democrats, after they select a candidate to run for president, they have a convention. The Republicans do the same thing, they have their own convention. So after the primaries, each party, the Republicans and the Democrats, have a convention. There's 3 goals at each of these conventions. 1, they officially name the party's political candidate. 2, they bring various factions and leading personalities in the party together to support the candidate. So they show everybody in the Republicans all get together and they say, hey, blah, blah, blah is our candidate. And then everybody talks about how great a candidate is and they try to get as much support as possible. And the last thing is, at the Democratic convention or the Republican convention, they adopt a platform. This is just a formal statement of basic principles and objectives. This is like what the campaign is running on. Like Obama, when he ran on Obamacare. Okay, he wanted to change the healthcare system. That was part of his platform. That was a big part of his platform. And that's where we're ending for this segment. Next, we'll talk about how a person actually gets voted in to become president of the United States. It's not just a popular election.